Alright, so working on the engine swap again for the Escalade here. You can see I did buy a ramrod for the car.
Ramrod, you get it?
Yeah, I got it.
So I am going to be doing the cam bearings on this one. I just decided to go ahead and buy the cam bearing installer. So right now I've just been going through and taking these things out. I got the first 3 out. I'm going to do 4 and 5, and then I will put this in the truck and we're going to take it to the car wash and spray it down. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and install the tool inside the bearing. So I'll put the tool in, and then I'll tighten it up, and then it expands inside the bearing, and there's a little lip on it that catches the bearing. So now it won't come out. I'll give it some taps. I'm just going to use the dead blow and we'll knock it out. There you go. So now the bearing's out. Just loosen it a little bit. The bearing slides right off. Alright, so I got the heads and the block out on the tailgate. I'm just using that super clean foaming stuff. Just trying to get the big chunks really. I'm not too worried about it just being oily or dirty or anything. What I want to do is make sure that I get all the big goobery chunks out and all the cat litter and stuff that was dropped in there. Mainly inside here, there's a lot of junk inside there that I want to get out. So, got my little guy with me today. So I'm going to let this stuff kind of drizzle out of here and then I'll spray it with the hose. Okay, so I'm going ahead and putting the cam bearings in. I got 2 of them installed already. Just wanted to kind of practice those. I've never done it before, so we'll do the 3rd one now. So on the box it comes with 3 different numbers for each position. So you have your 1 and 5, 2 and 4, and number 3 position. So the number 3 position is this 1816, which is in the middle of the box. So they're in order, but want to verify the number. So this is the, kind of hard to see, but this is the 1816. So 1816, 3rd position. So what I did earlier was I measured how deep this thing needs to go into the bore to line up where the old bearing was. So I need to have about this much of it covered up. Like from my fingernail in to the center needs to be covered up so it's inside the bore far enough to get the bearing where it was originally. And what I'll do is I'll verify with an Allen wrench to make sure the hole's lined up afterwards. I'm going to make sure that I have a hole, the lube hole, lined up with the lube hole in the block as I assemble this thing. I'm going to put the bearing in, put this piece over, make sure I push it back all the way. Then I can slide the bearing over it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it kind of into the bore just so it puts even pressure on the tool so the bearing is lined up right. I'm going to start to tighten this thing. What I've also been doing is I'm using a pipe wrench on the tool so I can turn it and get a little bit more leverage so I can get the thing really tight on the bearing. I'm also going to line up this little cone so that bar is nice and center inside there, so when I give it the first whack it'll be kind of straight in there. Alright, so I did get all of the bearings in. It was a little challenging, I guess. I don't think that tool is the greatest tool. I think if I had to redo it again, I would get the tool that's actually fit for the bearing instead of one of these universal kinds that has all these little things in it, because this expands and then it ends up putting like uneven pressure on the bearing. I did end up modifying this a little bit. Basically, each of these sections has like a sharp corner on it. So what I ended up doing with this other one was taking a file and I actually rounded off the corners on it so it wouldn't nick up the bearing. It did work a little bit better on this back one. I did it for the last one. I filed those corners, but you can feel a little bit that there's definitely some material that was kind of pushed in from the tool. And there is a LS bearing tool on Amazon that's like $66. It's the same price as this one, but it's just one size that's fit for the LS. So I think maybe I'll even return that one and get the other one. It's not hard to do it, but I think you definitely really want a good tool for that. So if the bearings fall out of it after like 20 miles, then I know that it was my fault. So next I'm going to start going through and putting the crank back in, and I do have the bearings oriented the right way. So I'm going to be reusing all the bearings. So I'll clean this up a little bit just with a rag, and then I'll start throwing that back in. Alright, so I got the crank in. And I did do the outer caps already. I'm just going to make sure it still spins nice by hand, and I'll go through and tighten up the other inner 13mm bolts. So I'm just going to like 56 foot-pounds. And I'll put in the 10 side bolts. Alright, so here's what I'm doing with the swap over. So this is the number 4. This is going to be the new rod. So I'm going to keep the bearing, and the bearing is going to go back on the same journal that it was on in the same direction. So I'm going to pop off the cap. Pop off the cap on this one. And make sure that the dots are both up on both of them. Now I'm going to pull the bearing out, and I'm keeping everything in the same direction just so I know that it's going to go back on the journal the exact same way. And I'll wipe it out, wipe all the junk out of it. Put a little assembly lube on the bearing. Make sure it stays in the same direction, and then I'm going to put it over on the engine. I have been throwing a little bit of lube inside the rings. Just kind of work that in there, and then how I normally do the rings, I make sure the gaps are on opposite sides, but I don't put any one of them parallel with the rod or the pin. So I'll usually go out like a 45. So I'll put one opening down at a 45 over here and one opening up over here. Make sure those are 180 from each other. And now I can put it on the engine. Alright, so I do have the Summit 3.780 compressor. Drop this thing on, dot forward. And if you don't have one of these ring compressors, go get one. They're like 30 bucks. Worth every penny. I'll just tighten the cap back on by hand, and then I'll go through, once everything is on, then I'll go through and torque everything. I did wipe a little bit of lubricant inside the cylinder walls too before I put that on, so lubricate cylinder walls, lubricate the rings. So I'll just go through and keep doing all of them. Alright, so we're humming right along here, all done, except for number 8. I ended up being one short because this one was cracked. I was starting to put it together. I didn't even notice the skirt right away, but I did notice that it was all nicked up on the top and looked a little rough, and the top ring was kind of hard to move, so I looked at it a little bit better, and that was the big obvious spot was what I missed. So that one's broken, can't use that one. So I'm going to ask around a little bit more. I think the guy that I got this one from said that he has some other ones, so I just sent him a message. If not, I'll keep digging around, but other than that, it's getting pretty close. I'll probably pull the lifters out of the old block and put those in here. I do still have these lifters from the other set, but they're pretty nasty. So yeah, I'll start working on that. I can at least get one side done, and we'll go from there. Right, so we're actually next day now. I did end up finding the other piston, so I got all of the pistons in there, and I realized after I put it together that I never even checked the ring gap. So I pulled one out, and it had like between a 22 and 23 thousandths ring gap. So that comes out to about 0.006 per inch of bore. So it should be okay. So the two pistons that are in the rear, they came from a different vehicle. So those things are already at like 26, 28 thousandths. They were pretty big. So 7 and 8 have a bigger gap. These are a little bit tighter. They're like 22, 23. So I'm just going to leave it the way that it is. I did get the cam in and the oil pump and everything on. Front and rear covers on. I'm honestly a little bit sketched out with how tight the cam is in there. It was like hard to turn over by hand, which seems a little tighter than normal, but I'm just gonna go with it, and we'll see how it ends up. So maybe it was the tool kind of messed up the bearing. I'm not really sure, or maybe it'll be fine. I don't know, but I can turn it over by hand. Like with a wrench, everything turns over pretty nice. Like feels normal, but the cam was just a little bit tight in there. Next, I'm just going to be going through and swapping the springs out, and then I'll put the heads on. I do have the lifters in. I'm just reusing the lifters from the 6 liter. Got a big old mess here, but I did end up getting rid of the old blocks. A local guy ended up needing a set of Gen 4 rods, so I had him come pick that thing up. He has a white Fox body, and he ended up spinning a bearing and then wrecked some of the rods, so that one still had 7 good rods and a good crank in it, so he just took the whole block. I just gave it to him because I didn't really feel like having the thing laying around, so worked out for both of us. So let's get these valve springs swapped out and get the heads on. Alright, so here it is. I got pretty much everything all together, both heads on, everything's tightened down. I just have to do the valve covers yet. I need to get a valley cover gasket. I think I gave away my good gasket on the engine that I just gave away. So I have to put the balancer on and a couple other things, but other than that, she's pretty much ready to go. So I'm going to go get a valley cover gasket. I'm going to weld in the drain bung into the new oil pan. I got to clean that thing out yet. A lot of not really exciting stuff. So I'll work on that stuff, get this video up, and then next video we should be putting it back in the truck.